the bottom line is he's playing so well that I think it is kicking up people talking about, is now the time to trade Linus Ullmark. And I saw somebody threw out Linus Ullmark to Edmonton for Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, which is, I think, going to be the trade rumor du jour that we're going to hear all year long now that Mark Scheifele has signed a big contract extension.
The hot stove is cooking, Haggs.
Yes, but
flipping them up.
Welcome to another edition of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. As always, I'm your host, Joe Haggerty. You can find my work at joehaggerty.substack.com. If you join with a premium membership, you will get all of my articles sent directly to your inbox via email, and you can read them all beginning to end. Even if you just sign up for the free portion of the newsletter, you will get everything sent to you, but a lot of the stuff you will not be able to read. So sign up for that premium membership. Also, you can check out my stuff at Boston Sports Journal. After every game, I'm doing what I like to call, and what Rob Bradford used to call, a golem. It's a gamer/column after the games that kind of gives a take on what I saw during the game, analysis, all that stuff. Thank you very much this week to Evan Marinofsky, right above me here. He's from the New England Hockey Journal. He's going to join us and talk some Bruins, also some other stuff around the New England hockey scene. He covers it all for the New England Hockey Journal, so he's a great person to have on. Before we get to the hockey, though, I would like to really quick mention my sponsors. First, FanDuel Sportsbook. NFL season's about midway. Man, my fantasy football team sucks this year, and it looks like we're already out of the playoffs because we're getting past that midway point. So we're right into the middle of things NFL-wise. NHL season's really cranking up now. Finally, the San Jose Sharks, God bless them, got a win. So now they're thank God for Mike Greer, they got a win. I was worried about him and Quinny out in San Jose. But the point is, there's a lot of good stuff to bet on with FanDuel and wager on. So right now, customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. So visit FanDuel.com/Boston and kick off the NFL season. Also, let's thank Factor Meals. America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit. Delicious meals, healthy meals, ready in 2 minutes. If you're busy like me, running around from tournaments to hockey games to all kinds of stuff, it's perfect for lunch and dinner meals. My wife is very health conscious. She loves it too, so it checks all the boxes. Head to factormeals.com/Haggs50 and use code Haggs50 to get 50% off your first box. I am a client in addition to they are delicious, the Factor meals. So thank you very much to them. Now let's get on with the hockey. Evan, let's just right off the hop. Mason Lohrei, should he play another game in the AHL for Providence? He's been pretty impressive as far as I've been concerned since he came up, scored a goal in his last game along with Johnny Beecher. It was a real statement again, which we've seen a bunch this season, that the kids are doing extremely well for this Bruins team, and perhaps their draft and development pipeline was way more maligned by places like The Athletic than it should have been, based on what we've seen development wise with a lot of the young kids this season. Should Mason Lohrei just stick around and they figure out a way to make it work based on what we've seen?
It's interesting. I was sort of conflicted after Monday night's game against the Stars. It's weird when they play Mondays. I'm not used to it, like when they usually play Tuesdays.
Yep.
It's interesting. The offensive production's there, and I've liked what I've seen offensively. Just defensively, I think he's struggled at times, against Detroit. I know he got benched there at the end against the Stars, which I get. I know a lot of people are like, oh, he's, Monty's just like Cassidy. And it's like, if you're a younger player and you make a mistake towards the end of a game against a good team, like, that's going to happen. That doesn't really matter who the coach is.
Yeah, I'm not even sure that call that benching. I'd call that shortening the bench and going with players that, you have more confidence in or whatever. Like, he's playing, I think he's played more than 20 minutes in every single game that he's played since he come up. So you're not really sitting on the bench that much if you're a defenseman, if you're getting over 20 minutes a night at the NHL.
No, the interesting thing with Lohrei is, like, and this, my feeling on him coming out of training camp was like, it's good he's going to Providence, get used to the defensive systems, get used to structure, all those things. So I think, to me, like, this is such a half-hearted answer. The jury's still out, on whether or not he should go back. I liked what I've seen offensively. He's assertive. He shoots the puck from the point. I think he already has more points than Hampus Lindholm this year,
Yep.
just off the top of my head. or at least it's similar. But it's just that defensive side. I mean, the other thing is like when everybody's healthy again, right? Now Grzelcyk won't be healthy, be back until the end of November at the earliest. Is it worth keeping him around to be a third pairing defenseman up here? I think that's sort of the question. I know a lot of people are very quick to want to jump to ship Grzelcyk out of town or Forbort out of town. But to me, I think like be the worst if he went back to Providence. If the kind of the inconsistent play in his own zone continues. Again, he's a younger defenseman in the NHL who was a forward like 4 years ago.
Yep.
So I don't think it's a bad thing if he does. But again, if he lights the world on fire in these next couple games, then that's sort of put to bed. But just through 3 games that I've seen, I'm sort of still wanting to see a little more out of the defensive zone.
I mean, look, from what I've seen, like obviously there's going to be growing pains with a player that's 22 years old that's, played like what 10, 15 AHL games from Ohio State,
even including last year.
Right. That's what I mean. There's obviously going to be things that he's going to have to work on at the NHL level. There's obviously things where he's going to get exploited by more experienced players. And there's going to be times in his D zone for sure, because he's not known as, a stay-at-home defenseman. That's not what he does best.
No.
Like, I think throughout his career, there's always going to be a balance between trying to be serviceable and, good enough defensively while also shining the light on his puck moving skills, his ability to, be assertive offensively and to really make
picking your spots.
Yeah. So like, and I think obviously he's focused a lot from everything I've ever talked to him and the coaches, the focus has been on exactly that, picking his spots, making sure fundamentally he's sound and he's good as a two-way defenseman before he really, just like lets everything go offensively and really like, gets really aggressive like he wants to as far as moving the puck and looking for offense. But bottom line, they beat the Dallas Stars, a very good team on the road. The reason they lost the Wings game, as far as I'm concerned, was the penalties they were taking, and they lost their composure in that game. That wasn't about, some of the stuff that was happening defensively. I just felt like, they sort of lost their focus in the third period of that game, in the second half of that game, and lost their composure. And that was a big reason that
they were also due for a regulation loss.
Yes, 100%. And it was against a good team. It was against a good team that obviously, like, in the second period when they were getting power plays, they were putting their power play unit out there. Like that's how they got back in the game. And yeah, you're going to lose some of those, but just the fact that they've been missing Charlie McAvoy, they've been missing Derek Forbort, they've been missing Matt Grzelcyk. And for the most part, you haven't noticed. For the most part, they've still won games. They've still been extremely competitive. There has not been glaring mistakes that Mason Lohrei has made, defensively, or you can't really point to a ton that has been happening and say that's his fault. There's a couple things here or there for sure, but like it's been as good or better than it was before. The train just continues to roll with what they're doing. So like when I see that and I see the impact that he's making more than others offensively, and it's basically what we saw in training camp. I thought he was ready to go in training camp. He looked NHL ready to me in training camp. He continues to look that way now. And I think if he gets sent down, it's because they can't make a trade to open up a spot for him when everybody gets healthy and when everything comes back. Like, I don't think he's going to be, even if everybody's healthy, I don't think he's a bottom pairing defenseman in Boston. I think if everybody comes back healthy, he's going to be a top 4 defenseman, and somebody else is going to slide down to the bottom pairing. Like I don't.
Yeah, I just need to see. I just need to see a little more. Again, to make that, because like I agree, like there is a spot for him in that top 4 if he continues to produce offensively. And the defensive metrics also just haven't been amazing for him the last couple games. Out chance.
Oh God, are you going to get out the bar graphs? Are you going to get out all the stuff that's going to make my eyes glaze over right now, Evan?
Do it. I'm gonna put you to sleep. It's gonna be my podcast from now on. You're gonna fall asleep. But then the reality is, and also the other thing is like the goaltender, like against Dallas, Swayman was outstanding.
Yes.
Now, I don't remember exactly the
true.
number of chances that happened when Lohrei was out there, but I know they were pretty much outchanced fairly heavily. So again, like the goaltending has been great. I think that's another thing that you haven't noticed the defensemen at times because Swayman's been that good. I think one of the biggest stories of this start of the season is this is the best Swayman has ever looked to me in the NHL. Like,
and we're gonna get back to that because that's another thing we're gonna talk about. But you're right. You're absolutely right that the goaltending has been very strong and has erased a lot of the mistakes that are being made, or some of the things that aren't going right in front of them in the D zone. You're 100% correct about that, and that sort of factors into the calculation as well. But when it comes to defensive zone work, when it comes to that kind of stuff, like I'll give leeway and slack all day long to the fancy stats crew when it comes to offense, when it comes to shots on net, when it comes to puck possession, when it comes to a lot of those other things. Like, I salute you. Most of the time they're throwing out stats that are telling me what I'm already seeing. Like, everybody's going to trot out fancy stats from the Dallas game that say the fourth line was great. Like, thanks. I could see that with my eyes. Like, it was obvious in that game that Oscar Steen and Johnny Beecher and who else?
Danton Heinen.
And Danton Heinen, thank you, were very good in that game. Like, that's the part that kills me about the fancy stats is like when everybody's already saying the line is playing great, I don't need to hear that they outshot their counterparts like 8-1 when they were on the ice. Like, it's obvious. Like, tell me something I'm not seeing with my eyes. But in the defensive zone issues, when it comes to the defensive side of the puck, I think good defensive players very often are just trashed by fancy stats. They look bad in the fancy stats categories. They have fancy stats like pocket protector brigade that are killing them, like the Derek Forborts of the world that block shots, that kill penalties, that do a lot of those things. Those are never the darlings of that kind of stats and those kind of numbers in that crew. And so I don't put a lot of credence, as far as I'm concerned, in the defensive zone metrics. I still don't think they've been perfected or tell the real story of what's going on. But that being said, I agree with you that there are things he's going to have to learn. He's 22 years old. I think I put it this way. I think Mason Lohrei is very quickly entering a realm that's exactly where Matt Poitras was in training camp and through the first 9 games of the season, where I think Mason Lohrei is doing so much to help this team win and is doing so much to make an impact that he's almost getting to the point where he's saying to the Boston Bruins management, you can't send me down. You need me here. Like, I'm so good at what I do, and I'm so good. And he's going to continue to spread his wings. And I think eventually he's going to be the guy that's at the point quarterback in the power play on the first power play unit, because I think he's much more of a natural power play quarterback than any of the other defensemen they have, with all due respect to McAvoy and Lindholm. Like, I think he's going to continue to show that there's a place for him here, that he can make an impact here, and that he belongs here, and that competitively speaking, the Bruins can't send him back, in addition to him, like, development-wise. And I that's what I see. But, like, obviously you're right that there are definitely things he's going to have to learn and get better at.
We're already seeing him on that. You saw him, I think, in Dallas a little bit on that second power play unit, because by God, does that need a new quarterback?
Yep.
So I just, it's interesting with the advanced stats, because you're right. Sometimes your Brandon Carlos of the world, your Derek Forborts can kind of get hammered with that. But there's context. I mean, I think people can look at, the defensive zone start percentage that they have and know that, hey, a guy like Forbort and Carlo are out there a lot, in their own zone. They're going to get outchanced.
Yeah.
But I think with guys like Lohrei, where, again, in the past couple of games, Lohrei has gotten kind of even deployment throughout the ice. So I don't think it's been, overly in the offensive or defensive zone. I think in a perfect situation to start his career, if everybody wasn't hurt, the majority of his starts would be either, on the fly or in the offensive zone.
Yeah.
But he is having to adapt to playing with Brandon Carlo and being in the defensive zone. So again, he's getting those tougher matchups. He's getting, difficult ice time. But I agree. And again, like, in terms of helping them win, I mean, scores a goal the other night, assisted on whose goal was it against Toronto? I mean, he assisted on someone's. And then he almost scored one himself. Like, Samsonov was turned the other way. So to me, you're right. I think the production is there. I just wonder, because the Bruins love their well-rounded players. This. They love their well-rounded guys.
Yep.
I wonder if whenever the decision has to be made, again, and if he continues to light up the world points wise, you have no choice. You can't, you need those, this team needs those points. But I do wonder if at the end of a couple games, they say, hey, you know what, guys, come back. Let's, we're contending. Let's get him some more seasoning. I did think it was very interesting, though, that Montgomery mentioned that that Mujanel said that was his best game against the Maple Leafs he's had all season, including the AHL. So, I think it's going to depend on that and where he fits. But again, I said this on Bruins Beat, I'm not ready to trade a defenseman yet. I'm not, because I think you're seeing it now. Look at the injuries that are piling up. I think you're going to need depth. And the tough part, and I think you and I have said this before, Forbort and Grzelcyk bring different things. It's not the same defenseman. You can trade one.
No,
one's a penalty killing, shot blocking, shutdown guy. The other's a puck moving, great 5-on-5 defenseman. It's just kind of what you prefer. So, but I agree. I mean, Lohrei's definitely trending up.
And, this is why, and I've been pretty consistent on this. I think if a defenseman does get traded to make room for Mason Lohrei, I don't think it's Derek Forbort, because I think he brings a completely different skill set to the table than Mason Lohrei. You're not going to trade away. You're not going to trade away your penalty killing, shot blocking, mean SOB in front of the net that you're going to need, when things get nasty in the playoffs. To make room for Mason Lohrei. Matt Grzelcyk is the guy that's going to get traded if and when they decide Mason Lohrei is ready and they need to move a defenseman. And I think it's just as simple as one guy is 6'4", 215 pounds, and one guy is 5'9", 175 pounds. And that's what it comes down to is, even if Mason Lohrei is learning defensively, it still is going to make the Bruins a much more formidable team and better team in the D zone if they have a guy that's that big in the D zone in front of the net battling instead of a guy that is getting overpowered physically when he has to play in front of the net, as Matt Grzelcyk does. And that's just reality. As much as I love Matt Grzelcyk as a person and a player, I think that's what it's as simple as that when it comes down to it, is they want 6'2", 210, 20 pounds across the board for all their defensemen, just like every team that they play in the playoffs when they have a hard time getting to the front of the net.
That's exactly it. I mean, you look at, it's a copycat league. You look at the Knights, you look at the Lightning, you look at these teams with these huge defensemen, and you look at the Bruins. If Lohrei does fit, right, and let's say Lohrei long-term is either with McAvoy or Carlo, Lohrei is 6'4", McAvoy's 6'1", but he's thick and he's strong. And you look at Lindholm, who's 6'4", and Carlo, who's 6'4", and Forbort is all these guys are big. And and Shattenkirk's 5'11". So I mean, again, that's not tall, but that's not small either. So I do wonder there. My only thing with trading Grzelcyk, because I agree, if Lohrei pans out, Grzelcyk does become expendable. I just wonder what the value is. I don't want to dump Grzelcyk for nothing.
No.
I think you need to get something for him.
You'd have to get assets, and that is a whole different conversation about. Are you trying to get a player that's going to help you now because you feel like you need another scoring option in your top six? Do you trade him for some of the future assets that you've traded away, draft picks, prospects, etc.?
I think that's the move. I think it is too. The move.
Yeah, I think it is too, especially with their salary cap situation. I honestly, I like what they have for a team right now. I just think that's the identity of this team this year, and I don't think adding one more forward is going to radically change the forwards they're going to be able to get with whatever move they're going to make. It's not going to radically change their offense where they're just going to be blowing teams away. I think this is a team that's going to be white knuckling it in the third period all year with 1-goal leads, 2-goal leads, like we've seen all along. They just don't have enough offense to gain separation against good teams and even not so good teams. They just don't pile up big leads in the third period and pull away.
And that wins in the playoffs. It does. Wins in the playoffs.
It does, but it's a stressful way to go through an 82-game regular season playing that way. Mentally and physically, it puts a toll on a team to have to win like that all the time, but that's just who they are. It's going to be interesting to see how they respond to that over the course of the season. All right, two things. This was a tweet from Butchergrass, I don't know, within the last week. I'd be surprised if
I
Mason
saw
Lohrei played another game in the AHL and the Bruins don't make a trade
Oh.
soon with one of these teams that needs a D-man. First NHL goal for Lohrei. Okay, he tweeted that during the Dallas game. And one quick aside, or two quick asides. We mentioned Brandon Carlo a couple of times. I think he's been phenomenal in this first month of the season.
Yes.
Killing plays, killing penalties, playing strong, being a little nastier around the net, moving the puck adequately, certainly stepping up to shoot pucks on net. And, he's made a couple of plays offensively. Oh, that was the play. He made a play. Lohrei made the play where he found Carlo coming down the sideboards. And then Carlo passed it to, I forget who it was that scored, but he made a nice pass to Zacha that scored. That was just a great play all around by both of those guys. And it highlighted how much those kind of developed into somebody that can make plays like that as well. When he's put in that position. So that was something really promising to see. And the other thing was,
and he's been, by the way, he's been so good in his own end. To me, this is what you've sort of been waiting for. Or not waiting. I mean, it's been there in the past couple of years, but I think there's been inconsistent play at times from him. But I mean, the fact that he's turned into someone that is very worth the money so far, and a good shutdown defenseman who can chip in offensively and make smart puck plays, and you can rely on him pretty much in any situation other than the power play. To me, I think Lindholm's been fine. I think there are times Lindholm tries to do too much, which kind of screws him over. Carlo, to me, has really embraced being a simple defenseman who makes good, smart plays. And that's what's going to make him one of the better shutdown guys in the league, is make smart plays. And that's one thing that you see this at the youth level. You tell kids all the time, you don't need to dangle. You don't need to, don't hold on to the puck an extra second, make smart plays and good things will happen. And I think Carlos,
especially when those kids are coming out of the D zone, right around their own blue line.
Yes. Just make the smart play.
Just make the smart play, get the puck out of the zone, relieve the pressure, and then fight the battle in the neutral zone. And and you're right. I think what it comes down to with Carlo is he's made peace with who he is and learns to maximize his strengths. And he knows exactly who he is as a player and what he can do and kind of what he can't do. And he's sort of found his game. His best game, while knowing that. The other part that I wanted observation from that game was Patra had, I think, one of his worst, certainly one of his quietest games, while Beecher and Lohrei stepped up and produced offensively and made things happen. And this is the peaks and valleys that we're going to see from a 19-year-old kid in the NHL, where it's not going to be highlight reel stuff every single night. And that was one of those games where I just didn't notice him that much. And I think he ended up without a shot on net when it was all said and done.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there's going to be, you're going to see it. I think you saw it. I think it was the San Jose game, which is funny to think back now. That team just won their first game on Tuesday night. I was really rooting for them to lose last night and then to beat Edmonton on Thursday and watch the hellstorm that would come from that.
Yeah.
But that's a young guy, 19 years old. You're going to have some games where you don't notice him. You're going to have games where you do notice him. And I think that's the case for a lot of these younger players, but I think especially Patra, because he is that young and he's in that big of a role where there are going to be games that you don't notice him as much. And that's kind of, as you said, the peaks and valleys. You got to deal with it with a younger player. It's unfortunate, but I think it happens to everybody. So I didn't read too much into that. I thought when you were going to say Buccigross tweet, I thought you were going to mention that he kind of started the wheels on the Ullmark thing.
Well, that's what we're going into next. Is I couldn't find the tweet, but it was a ridiculous trade that he threw out there with 7 players. That's never going to happen. Never. Yeah, it's never going to happen. Patra was going to Edmonton. There was all kinds of craziness in that. I think
Lysell too.
Yeah.
Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action, NFL. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including you got spreads, you got your player props, you got over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/Boston and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
That does open up the goaltending discussion. Jeremy Swayman 6-0-0, top 5 in goals against and save percentage in the NHL right now. Definitely playing at another level, has been all year. And I kind of called this. I want to pat myself in the back of the shoulders, head, whatever. I saw this coming because you could see how dedicated he was in the summertime, sticking around in Boston, working out at Warrior, going to BU to work with the NHL guys. Monday through Friday, he was in Warrior every day, like, working on his training and being in the best shape that he possibly could, and really working hard with the Bruins performance guys. Kevin Neald and those boys, Tim Lavoisier, all the guys with the Bruins. And you're seeing the results now. Like I think he wants to be the number one goalie of the Boston Bruins. He wants to be the guy. He wants to be the guy that gets the start game 1 of a playoff series when they start the playoffs. He wants to be a guy that never goes through something like the arbitration process he had to go through.
I was
last year.
just about to say,
like
the arbitration and then being picked over 2 straight playoff runs.
Yes.
And, letting Ullmark's wheels fall off before they turn to him, I think is huge.
Yeah, and then he should have played Game 5 for that first round series against the Florida Panthers. I still can't believe that he didn't. But dropping him into Game 7 of that series was ridiculous. He needs to get the puck, get the nets to start the next playoff series, because he has not been able to do that the last couple of years where Linus has gotten those chances. But the bottom line is he's playing so well that I think it is kicking up people talking about, is now the time to trade Linus Ullmark. And I saw somebody threw out Linus Ullmark to Edmonton for Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, which is, I think, going to be the trade rumor du jour that we're going to hear all year long now that Mark Scheifele has signed a big contract extension.
The hot stove is cooking, Haggs.
Yes, but like for me, even though the hot stove is cooking, even though the Bruins fans are getting invested, this is good for our business, right? With the page views and everything else. This is not
podcast topics.
Yes, that's true. That's true. This is not the time. This is not the year, I think, to trade a Bruins goaltender. I know Brandon Bussy's playing really good in Providence. I know that he looks like he's NHL ready, and you kind of can, come up with this scenario in your head where Bussy comes up, Swayman's ready to be the number one. That's your duo. You trade Linus Ullmark. You get the $5 million savings in salary cap space. Maybe you trade him to a place where you can bring in a center like Ryan Nugent-Hopkins that can be a top 6 center for you. And it solves a lot of their problems this season. But I have a big time issue with this Boston Bruins team that is built solely on defense and goaltending and like situational offense, is going to be playing 1-goal games all year in the third period. You need 2 number 1 goalies right now with the way that they're playing. Yes. And you need goalies that are going to save you in the third period and make big saves and save you at points when your game is in a lull, like we've seen. That's the biggest strength of this team, as far as I'm concerned, this year and last year's goaltending. That's why they fell on their faces partially in the playoffs, is because the goaltending went out the door. I don't think this season you can trade Linus Ullmark just based on the way your team is built and how reliant you are on excellent goaltending every single night. You need them to be the Jennings Trophy winners again this season, Ullmark and Swayman, just like last year, if you're going to be your best selves for this Bruins team this year.
Yeah, not now. No, don't trade Ullmark now. I've seen this. Everyone's going bananas about this on Twitter. And also for Nugent-Hopkins, I know he was 104 points last year. Up until then, he was, again, 50-point guy, 40-point guy, 60-point guy. Like, to me, first of all, I want to see, and I said this the other day, I want to see Swayman and Ullmark rotate in the playoffs. I want to see them try it. I really do. I know there's a lot of
a strict every other game rotation.
I want to see them try it because clearly last year was not the move. Give it a shot. Like, to me, you've got the goalies. You're the team that should try it. Everything is in place to do it. Try it. I want to see it happen. So that's my number one thing. Number two, doing it now, I just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And also, if you were to, first of all, also the other thing, Ullmark has a modified no trade. What are the chances he accepts a trade to Edmonton? So low. I mean, My guess would be 0. That would be that's not insider information, but that would be my guess.
Yeah, the only way I think it's a better chance of Edmonton than it might have been before McDavid was there. Like, I think now, like, and obviously they're struggling right now, but I think there's at least a legit chance to win a cup, you feel like, with a team like that, especially if you're a goalie that can come in and be a difference maker. But like, yeah, based on his comments, based on what he said last year, where he kind of like slapped Buffalo around, talking about the, not wanting to go to the cold places or something like that. Like, maybe Edmonton's not on there for those reasons. And like, traditionally, it's probably not going to be a lot of people's wish list as to where they're going to go. But
exactly. And for goalies, I think, like, defensively, they are not as good. They are
true.
So behind. So again, your numbers are going to take a dip. You're going to face way more better shots. So, and again, I think that hurts him because, again, he's coming up on a contract year after next season. So, like, I don't think you want to be, hey, you're the Vezina guy in Boston, but you go to Edmonton and you're a middle of the road goalie, so we're not going to pay you anywhere near Vezina money. And again, I don't know what he's going to get. That's a topic for another day. But like,
right.
Again, I don't know the likelihood of that. The other thing is Edmonton would be negotiating from a place of complete desperation. I would hope if you were to trade Ullmark to them, you would get a lot more than Nugent Hopkins, whether that's, first prospects. I don't know what their prospect pool looks like, but like, you would need more. And the other thing is just like, if that move is to come, you want the trade market to be a little bit better. And I think you'd want to do it in the offseason. And to me, we mentioned this earlier, Grizzly, for a pick. I want to see them get back in the first round. If you're gonna deal Ullmark, you need picks. That's what to me. I think that's what you need. If you can get an Elias Lindholm or something, awesome, right? But if it's not such a sure thing like that, if you're going to trade him, I'm talking off season hypotheticals. Right. I'm like, now is off the table for me. I'm just saying hypothetically in the off season. Like, I would like picks. I think that's what the Bruins should want, because again, you kind of want to, it's not a bridge year, but you guys, you're lucky that Poitras, Lohrei, and Beecher are sort of panning out. You'd like to add to that, I would think.
Yeah, and I guess the argument for Nugent,
if you're to deal Ullmark,
I think the argument for Nugent Hopkins, if you were to make a trade like that, is that he's signed for a pretty good number for a long period of time, so you'd be getting a player that you would have for the long haul. If you traded for him. But I'm of the agreement with you. I think if you're going to trade the reigning Vezina Trophy winner, and you're going to trade him someplace, if I'm Don Sweeney or the Bruins, I look at this team this year and say, they're pretty good. Like, I'm not as desperate now for a top 6 center as I used to be. And I want to start recouping some of the assets that I've traded away over the last couple of years, because we're not going for it this year. Like, this is a year where, we make the playoffs. We've developed some young players. It's sort of like a transitional year, and we don't need to go for broke this trade deadline. This is one where we should try to recoup assets rather than trade them away and go for it like we did last year. And, start to make up for some of the pain that they still feel from last year with the first round picks and the assets that they traded away only to lose in the first round with a loaded up team. So I agree with you. I don't think this is the year to do it. I think if you're going to do it after the year. I think it's as much to do with the team that they have and the importance of the goalies as it is as anything else. So I understand. And like, look, I love the trade rumors. I love that people are getting the stove burning. That's all great, but not something I would do. All right, let's switch gears.
Ullmark for Gretzky, one for one. Ullmark for Gretzky, 1 for 1. I'm doing that. That's what I'm doing.
Is he going to come and be the head coach? We're going to get rid of Monty. It's going to be like Arizona Coyotes Redux, where he's behind the bench.
He's going to be a player coach. He's going to run the offense and play on the first power play. I think,
and do analysis in the studio at TNT in between periods too. He can do it.
They're going to mic him up during the game.
There you go.
Do a constant commentary as he skates.
And we can have Biz on the fourth line too. I think that's what we got to hold.
Yeah.
Too. Why not? Bring them all back.
Talkett can come in and be an assistant. I mean, I think it'll work out great.
Yeah, let's just take the entire. Anson Carter can come back for another run with the Bucs.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Fantastic. We do have Factor Meals to help us out. America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit. When it does get busy, when it does get crazy, when we do need a quick meal. They fuel you up fast with flavorful and nutritious ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. Takes less than 2 minutes to cook them. They're fresh, never frozen. Meals ready in 2 minutes, like I said. They have calorie-conscious options, going upscale with some of the things they're offering now, like surf and surf meal options, roasted garlic, filet mignon, and shrimp, and Cajun spiced shrimp and salmon, which is like right in my wheelhouse. This is the kind of stuff I'm all about. So it's got everything for everybody. There's 34 plus chef prepared, dietitian approved weekly options for meals. You can get snacks, you can get breakfast items. Like it's a great deal. So if you want to get Factor meals, go to factormeals.com/Haggs50 and use the code Haggs50 to get 50% off of your first box. It's a great deal. I've tried it. It's fantastic. I recommend it to you. We love these ready to make meal kits, especially when we're on the go with our kids. So one more time, that's factormeals.com/Haggs50 to get 50% off your first box. You won't be sorry if you go to Factor Meals. It gets the Haggs thumbs up seal of approval. Switching gears a little bit, this is the Rink Live. It's a Twitter account, The Rink Live, and it's a website, The Rink Live. Why it's an interesting story. I have Evan here. He does a lot of stuff throughout New England for the youth, high school prep ranks, in addition to watching the pro hockey and covering the pro hockey. And he's actually going to St. Sebastian's for a big cover story that they're doing on the prep season. So I think he's the right person to have here to talk about this. The title of the article is Why Minnesota's Youth Hockey Model Keeps Numbers Rising and Growing the Gap with Other States. And here's just a couple graphs from it. When you look at the numbers between Minnesota and Massachusetts, some of the numbers have flipped. In 1992-93 in Division I men's hockey, there were 204 Division I players from Minnesota and 185 from Massachusetts. That's pretty close to even. Mm-hmm. This season, Minnesota has 233 players and Massachusetts has 127. So basically half. In 2002, there were 24 players from Minnesota and 40 from Massachusetts. Then about 20 years later now, last season, there were 67 players from Minnesota and 32 from Massachusetts. Again,
is this in the NHL?
In the NHL, yes. So 67 from Minnesota, 32 from Massachusetts. And this is a quote here from, I forget who this was from, but by having publicly owned ice arenas, it allows youth hockey associations to keep costs low and much more affordable. It keeps more kids in the game. The associations aren't bent on how do we make the most money. Their focus is on how do we get more kids playing to the point where we need more ice now because we can't get enough ice. If you look at Massachusetts and when their numbers were declining and our numbers were increasing, their ice was shifting to privately owned rinks. Minnesota stayed public with more recruiting, more outreach, more attention, and stuck by the community-based model. Massachusetts used to have more of that. They have good people out there trying to get more kids involved in hockey. This is not a knock on them, but this is an example of why we keep our ice rinks publicly owned and the benefits that become of that. And if you're looking at overall numbers, Minnesota had 49,884 registered 18 and under hockey players for last hockey season, according to USA Hockey. Massachusetts was second with 41,000. So they were in the same ballpark. They both had between 40 and 50,000 kids 18 and under, followed by New York with 36,000. Minnesota and Massachusetts have the two most of any state in the U.S., according to USA Hockey. But the gap between Minnesota and Massachusetts has widened in the last 10 years. Last season, Minnesota had 8,812 more 12 and under players registered than Massachusetts. In 2013-14, they had 45,000 compared to 43,000 for Massachusetts, which was only a difference of 2,000 players. So they've like significantly widened how many more players they have 18 and under. It used to be a gap of 2,000 between Minnesota and Massachusetts. Now it's almost 10,000. It's 8,800 at this point. So, I think there's a lot that goes into this. I think there was a lot of opinions when I threw it on Twitter, the story, and people were reacting to it. Some of it was definitely the traditional stuff that we've heard before. And some people think it's because there's too much hockey in Massachusetts. There's too many summer tournament teams. There's not enough practice time and too many games. Lots of different things. I honestly think part of it too is, and a big part of it is, there's too many leagues and too many teams, too many options in Massachusetts, too much. Like it's turned into the level of hockey is not good enough anywhere. Like it's not good enough across the board for a lot of these players as far as competition goes, because there's so many leagues and so many teams. It's watered down. less of it in Minnesota, where I think the quality of hockey at these age groups is higher because they're all playing against each other. Here, you've got good players playing in this league. You've got good players playing in this league. They're not all playing together enough to really raise the level of hockey that they're playing, raise the level of competition, which is going to raise their level of play and make them better players. And I think that's a lot of what's going on. And it goes through to the high school level where there's, hockey academies, there's club hockey teams, there's split season, midgets, there's, spring, summer teams. There's all kinds of stuff going on. There's prep school, obviously, there's regular high school hockey. But it's not like in Minnesota where everybody plays for their public high school. And again, it turns into best against best, and everybody's, playing in a smaller league where they're all playing against each other. In New England and Massachusetts, once again, it's spread out all over the place where there's so many options and so many different places to go that you don't get that sort of higher level of competition. I'm just curious to ask you what your take is, what people that you've talked to think, because I'm sure this is a conversation that goes on with a lot of people that you talk to about why Massachusetts, while they're still the Will Smiths of the world, and there's still the players like the stud players on the Junior Eagles that, are going to be top 10 picks in the draft and that people are going to notice. And you and I have talked about the U14 team with, Pando's kid and Freddie Myers' kid and Jim Montgomery's kid and all these other players on it that, like, some of those guys are going to get drafted. There's no question about it. That team's talent level is through the roof. But, why do you think, or what do you think the biggest reasons are for what we've seen as far as like the gap widening between Minnesota and Massachusetts?
Well, you have to subscribe to New England Hockey Journal to read it. No, I'm kidding. As you were talking, though, I was like, this is an interesting story, and it's one we're always kind of working on, thinking about. You hit it with, again, like you look at Minnesota, and those kids go to their public high school, and like Minnesota high school hockey is a different stratosphere than Massachusetts high school hockey.
Yep.
Or even preps. I mean, I think a lot of like Minnesota, like those have the best kids. Kids go right out of Minnesota high school.
It was more like Massachusetts high school hockey was more like that when I was in high school. I went to high school.
That's exactly it.
I went to high school with a kid, Derek Edgerly, who was drafted by the Blackhawks right out of Stoneham High School. The Catholic Memorial back then had like multiple NHL draft picks on their teams. St. John's. Yeah, Matt Non, exactly. Like all these teams had like stud players on their teams.
So again, it goes back to here, the options have opened up. And like we always say, the options are a double-edged sword because on one end, yes, there's a lot of hockey and there's a lot you can do. But on the other end of that, it's watered down. I talk to college coaches who are out recruiting all the time, and it's like it's hard to find kids out here sometimes because there's a good kid here, there's a good kid there, they never play each other. And you also, again, you look at some of these select teams. Like when I was coming up, select teams, you had to be really good to play on a select team. Now you've got a tier 1, you've got a tier 2, you've got an elite, you've got a this, you got a that. And I think what's happened is it's great that kids have opportunity. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but yep. I think for the really good kids, it's really hard. And it's also hard as a parent. You're about to face this right now. What do you do? Because again, if you have aspirations to play hockey farther than high school, what is the route to play college hockey? Is it prep? Is it high school then an academy? Is it an academy? One thing, an interesting thing that you kind of touched on is the academy model, right? It's gotten bigger. South Kent, Shattuck was the big one in Minnesota.
Yep.
And then out here, South Kent, then all those guys went to Mount St. Charles. And now you're seeing, American Hockey Academy, Boston, North American Hockey Academy, all this stuff. The difficult thing with that is, and you do see some Minnesota kids come out here when they're 13, 14, 15 to play against kids their own age. So you see this with Mount. Mount is pretty good at recruiting kids from Minnesota because those high-end kids, I think like Dylan Dean's one, Conrad Fonderk is one, there are more that I'm blanking on, want to come out here and play against kids their own age. And so like Fonderk is with the national team. Dylan Dean is with the Long Island Gulls 15 team. He's very good. So like those things I think are very interesting on the reverse side of it. But I had someone tell me, and it was an interesting observation, that up until the age 14 year, Massachusetts dominates nationally. But once the kids hit 14, it's sort of like, what do? Do you go to prep? Do you go to your local high school? Do you go to a select? Do you go to an academy? Do you leave the region? Cole Eiserman didn't play hockey here. He went to Shattuck St. Mary's. Like,
Yeah.
so I think there's that dilemma for kids of where do I go? Where like there's an interesting story that I'm always kicking around. Like, what would Massachusetts high school hockey look like if the program didn't exist, if the USHL and juniors didn't exist, if prep schools didn't exist, and if private schools, if CM like didn't exist? And it's always an interesting thing to think about. Of like, oh, you got Cole Eisen with Newburyport High School, and you've got Will Smith last year with Arlington High School, and Ryan Leonard out at Pope Francis and things like that. So, but I think that's the ultimate reason. And the rink thing is interesting because there are a lot of privately owned rinks that do factor into those things and kind of jack the prices up. But one thing I've noticed is hockey families are more than willing to pay those prices. So I don't think that's as big of a thing as is the what do I do when my son or daughter, mainly son, because we're talking more along the boys' end of things here. What do I do when my son hits 14? So that's the biggest thing. And I think, like you're about to see it, and parents are all, it's a hard decision around here because there's so much. And as I said, it's a double-edged sword. And that's why places like Minnesota are having the success that they are, because colleges fly out there without issue to go watch the Minnesota State Championship for high school, because, along with the hair being really cool, the kids are really freaking good.
Yeah.
And like, they're all playing against each other. So I think, you hit it there. And that's where really, I think, in my own opinion, and, talking to a lot of people about this, that's what it is. Now, that doesn't mean that prep is bad or academy. Like, the hockey here is very good. That's not the issue. And the other thing you have, and like, this, I love talking about this stuff, as you can tell, like with prep, the best kids leave early, whether it be they leave after their junior year for juniors, whether they leave after their sophomore year, like a Richard Gallant for the program. Some like a Gavin Cornforth was with Thayer. He was with Tony Amonte at Thayer a couple of years ago. He left for the USHL after his freshman year. Like, there are kids that are, and there's no set right answer,
Right.
And like you still, like Owen Keefe, Jerry Keefe's son, went from Malden Catholic to the USHL and committed to BU, basically, I think, out of Malden Catholic. There's all these paths. There's no correct one. There's no wrong one, but there's a lot of paths. And I think that kind of provides a dilemma for parents and players.
No, it definitely does. And, I think the point that they were making to a degree with the story about the cost of privately owned rinks, the way it's become a money-making endeavor for so many of these programs that own the rinks and have the teams that play in those rinks, is that it begins to exclude kids that either can't afford it, or families that can't afford it, or families that just don't try hockey because they think it's too expensive. And you lose out on a whole wide swath of great athletes that could be great hockey players.
Yes.
Because they just never try the sport because it's deemed, too expensive to play for like an elite team in a program in one of these rinks. And, that's definitely part of the problem is, I think, and I try to tell when I'm talking to people a lot, because when you deal with the pros all the time, and I've been covering the NHL for like 20 plus years now, you realize when you're watching these kids when they're 9, 10, 11 years old, you don't know anything about what these kids are going to do as hockey players until they hit puberty, until they hit about 13, 14, until they start growing muscles and getting bigger and stronger, and you see what they're going to be athletically. Like, you can be as elite as you want at 9 and 10 years old. It doesn't matter. Like, that's the big dividing line, is once you hit the teenage years and you start, going through like adolescence towards adulthood. And that's when you start to see what they're going to look like as hockey players down the road. And, that's why I think sometimes like it's a little crazy to go too overboard with this stuff about it being anything more than fun, playing with your friends and having a good time at this age. Like, the club tournament thing is great. I mean, the club team thing is great if you're going into it for those reasons. If you're going into it to have fun, be with your friends, play in a couple tournaments, maybe go to Lake Placid or something, have a good time. Like, that is the number one.
That was my career.
Exactly. That's the number one priority. Like, with number two being making sure you're in a place where competitively it's challenging to you. Like, I think that's also important to kids that age as well, that they're like at least playing on some team that is like pushing them to be the best that they can be, instead of like, just dominating and being the best player wherever they are. You're better off being somewhere that's going to make you, push at that age a little bit. But you can't read anything on any players at that level. And even to call all this stuff elite, I think is kind of a joke at 9-10 years old. Like, they're just kids running around having fun that want to, like, go to McDonald's for a Happy Meal after the game is over.
They're eating Sour Patch Kids before they go on the ice. Like, we were all that age, and it was fun. And like,
exactly,
I think that's one of the things you see with these hockey families. And sometimes you hear rumblings from different big families that produce a lot of top, college kids. They were strict and they were hard on their kids, and that, it's like, great. I'm glad they got to the highest level, and that's awesome. But like, is that the best thing for a kid, to be like, treat hockey like a job from the age of 9?
Yep.
And I think that's one of the things that parents, that I talk to are always struggling with, is like, and a lot of parents like, oh, if my son or daughter did this team instead of this would have happened. And I think it's so tough because, like I hit on it earlier, just the options. There's so many things. It's so easy to be like, oh, if I sent, Johnny here, he would have done this, or, and then you also hit on, I like the point of, hockey's expensive, and it takes out a lot of kids who are really good athletes who probably like hockey a lot and are just like, yeah, it's not really feasible for my family. And so that's the tough part. And I think, it gets more expensive as you go along. Hockey equipment becomes more expensive. The teams become more expensive. The pressures of, hey, you should also work out. You should do this power skating clinic. You should do this other team. Not everybody can afford that, and that's fine. But it's sad that this game can't adapt to that and, be an option for people who can't afford 3 teams and 2 workouts away. I mean, you talk to some of these prep school kids and parents, like, oh, I worked out, every morning throughout the summer. And it's like, I was working at Target every day in the summer in high school. Like, we had different upbringings. But I think it does come back to, there's a lot of options in the area. And, I think it's an ever-changing field. That's the other thing. I think, I'm curious to see what happens. I know a couple of years ago, the big thing was like, our academy is going to take over for the prep model. I think now we're seeing that probably not. I think it's a good alternative. There are some academies that are, better on the ice than prep schools, but like, even a lot of these fall tournaments, Mount St. Charles's 18 team was losing to, club 18 teams in the area. Like, it happens. Whereas, but all the other thing, I don't want to go on too long about this, but like with a place like Mount, for instance, like the best teams at a place like Mount or, some of these bigger academies are the 14 and 15 years, because once those really elite kids hit 16, they either go to juniors, they go to the program. So when they get 16 and 18, those teams are fine, but they're not the high end James Hagens at Mount, kids of the world at 14 and 15. So, but yeah, I mean, it's tough. I think it comes down to this, Haggs. Are you having fun?
Yes.
That's what my dad used to ask me. Are you having fun? Are you enjoying it? Yep, Dad, I'm playing with my friends. It's a great time. All right, great. And that was my goal, was to play high school hockey at my high school, and I did. And that was awesome. And I think, most kids just want to play high school hockey with their buddies and, hit a couple kids through the glass, and like that's what they want to do. And that's hockey. That is
maybe get a game-winning goal and get a picture of it, or get a nice video to throw on your Instagram, like something.
Or
like
have your dad tweet your highlights and Bobby Orr see them on Twitter. I think that's a valid thing too. Not every kid's lucky enough that happens, but they're valid. That's a valid thing to want.
But right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's important. And at some point, as your son gets older and older, you're gonna have to start paying me as an advisor if we're gonna keep throwing advice towards your way about prep schools and stuff. But yeah, no, it's an ever-changing thing. It's an ever-changing thing. But it's fun.
It definitely is. And the one other thing that, and we can delve into this quickly, is the summer tournament thing, where there's like they're playing in tournaments every single weekend, elite tournaments. Not delving into playing other sports, which every scout I've ever talked to, every hockey management person I've ever talked to, they want kids that play all kinds of sports. They don't want to hear that a kid started specializing in hockey when he was 12 years old. They want kids that play lacrosse, baseball, soccer, whatever, that play a bunch of different sports, that develop different muscles, that develop different skills. Like, hockey scouts they love the kids that play baseball because you sit there and it's a totally different exercise of thinking about what's going to happen before the play happens. So much is reactive in hockey where you're just reacting to what's happening on the ice. Whereas baseball, you're thinking about what am I going to do when the ball gets hit to me? You're trying to outthink the pitcher when you're up the plate. It forces you to sort of think about things when you're on the bench watching, what would I do in this situation, where you might not do that if you didn't play baseball. And there are different approaches to the sports that they like
hand-eye coordination,
those kind of things. Yes, absolutely, 100%. Lacrosse is great for that with the hands as far as hockey goes. But there's less skill development in the summertime, and there's less of multi-sport athletes playing different sports because these kids are focused all year round on playing hockey and playing in these summer tournament teams, and that's filling up all of their time. And they were, and the belief was that that's a big part of the problem as well, which I agree with. I think specializing, I've talked to some people that they're around like 11 years old, 10 years old, and hockey was the only sport they were playing anymore, and they weren't playing any other sports. And they were like,
see, at that age, that's a waste. That's such a waste at that age, I think. And so this is the other thing, is that the three.
Well, it turns into burnout, right? It turns into like a kid that doesn't want to play hockey anymore when he's 14 or 15.
The three-sport athlete, unfortunately, is sort of right now being phased out, and that's a really tough reality, because a lot of prep schools want to continue that. The problem is, as much as people say kids should play three sports, kids who do focus, and by the way, I agree, you should not be specializing before the age of 14 or 15 years old. The problem is, though, that kids do start to specialize, and they are working at hockey more than other kids, and they are sort of getting better. And then those kids who play through sports say, you know what, I like hockey the most. Jimmy over there is much better than me, and he's, doing training during the summer stuff. I'm going to go do that.
Right.
And that creates the domino effect, the chain reaction of kids start to do that. And I know, like in prep, there's always the question of, should they start the season in October? Should they, should the season go longer than March? Should it be like a college schedule? And the tough part is, the kid who wants to play soccer can't play soccer.
Right.
And, the soccer team's pissed about that. And, other schools will see that and say, well, we're not going to play them because they're not taking these sports seriously. And it becomes a whole big thing. And I think one thing you're seeing now in prep is a lot of schools that aren't in the Boston area. So, the kids like Seb's doesn't have a team, or Milton, but a lot of like Kimball Union, Holderness, a lot of these teams, Cushing, have teams in the fall that aren't, Cushing, but they're all those kids on the team who play for one team and compete in the fall. Now, you don't practice every day like you would in a prep season, but you do play together during the fall. And that's sort of a kind of not under the table, because that makes it sound bad. It's completely legal and fine, but it's sort of like a way to get around having a fuller season. And I think it's a good idea for those kids. If you're in high school and you're just playing hockey, and you're at a Kimball Union or a Cushing, and you don't live near Boston, and you need to find a way to, you can't play for a team like the Junior Eagles or the River Rats or whatever. I think that's a great thing. Like I'm totally for it, but I think that's a way that the three-sport athlete, unfortunately, these days is kind of gone. It's just like kids don't go from prep to college anymore. They go prep to juniors, 1 or 2 years there, and then go to college. So I'm always fascinated by player development and how that happens. Like Mason Lohrei was at Culver. I remember seeing Culver last year at a tournament around here, and I was like, oh shoot, like Mason Lohrei was there like a couple years ago. And it's interesting, and it's interesting to see these kids and how they develop. And that's why I love my job, because it's constantly, seeing a kid at 14, 15 being really good. It's like, I wonder what they're going to be like in a year or two, and kind of seeing it through. So it's cool. But yeah, I agree with you. It's a wild world, and there's no set right answers for anything.
No, there isn't. There's no linear path. There's no like one way. There's that part is as good a piece of advice as you can give to anybody. Is just that there are so many different ways that work for so many different kids, that there's no one blueprint on how to do it, and it comes down to fit and when your kid starts to really develop and take off. But like I said, the tenets, the most important things, are they having fun, are they with their buddies, and are they playing somewhere that's challenging for them and whatever level that they're at. And as long as you have that, I think that everything else is gravy, and everything else can be figured out. I think it's pretty simple, like when it comes to those things as far as choosing. But it is interesting to see how the numbers are bearing out, and something is dividing Minnesota and Massachusetts at this point with the way that they're developing players. So something from a macro level is not going right in Massachusetts like it used to. And I think we're seeing like some of the radically different changes as far as the model goes for how things are done in Massachusetts and Minnesota. Go ahead.
One other thing I do want to hit on before we go, I'd love to see, because we always, you and I talk Bruins mainly on these podcasts. I'd be curious to see if people are really interested in these kinds of topics, because we clearly are both interested in them, and I'd love to see if people are, because I think you and I both have very interesting, different perspectives on this. You're a parent, I cover it, so it's a different thing.
You know what we'll have to have on? I'm a good buddies with John Lohrei. Do you know him? The Arlington High.
Of course I do.
I know he will come on a podcast anytime, and I've wanted him to come on here for a while. So maybe next time we'll have him on and get his thoughts too on what he thinks is going right or wrong, because he's one of those guys that coaches an Arlington team that's very good every year, puts together a good program, did the same thing in Winchester before that, has connections all through the hockey world, knows all kinds of people, has had kids drafted that he's coached out of public high school hockey, before. So, he's somebody that I think could bring some, and I think we'll do this again. Well, because I think this is something that people are interested in it for sure.
The other thing, Diver's another one, because Diver's stuff all the time. Yep. One last thing, it's funny, I was at the USA Hockey Select 17 camp this past summer in Buffalo, and it's interesting because those kids from Massachusetts that were there were very good, and they were, the talent was pretty even. They were solid. The Team New England ended up winning, so the New England region at these events does not include Massachusetts, because Massachusetts is big enough that they have their own team. So the Team New England actually won the event. They won the whole thing, which is crazy. But I do think that, the other thing you have to consider, aside from Minnesota versus Massachusetts, is there's more talent from other places.
That's true.
At Select 17 camp, the best kid there by far was Trevor Connolly, who is from California. And I think and he's going to be a first-round pick most likely this year. But so you're getting more talent from other places, and I think that's another element of Massachusetts guys aren't just being spoon-fed into the NHL anymore or to Division I hockey. You're getting commits not just obviously from your Minnesotas and Massachusetts, but from California and Florida and Georgia. Mason Lohrei from Louisiana, which they told us 755 times on the broadcast the other night.
Well, he was born in Louisiana. I wouldn't necessarily say he's from.
Yeah, he's not from it, but he's born there, so it's good enough.
Right.
Supports my argument, so I'm going to stick with it. But they're coming from everywhere, and I think that's another. And it's great that hockey's growing. Austin Matthews, I think, is from Arizona.
Yeah.
So I think that's another thing where elite guys are coming from other places, and and I think that. That's another factor. It's not the main thing, but I think it's also something to consider.
No, it definitely is. And we're going to wrap up. I will say, though, that you mentioned Mason Lohrei and a place that he played. He also played for Battery Hockey Academy out in Ohio, which is one of the teams that Finn actually played in a CCM summer invite over the summer when he played for Top Speed Hockey. So I thought that was interesting when I saw them send out a message with Mason Lohrei in their uniform the other day. So you're right. You don't know who you're going to come across or where these kids are playing. They play all kinds of different places. And that was a good program. That was actually a very good game to watch. So they come from all over, and it's interesting to watch how they develop and where they come from. But I think we're all in the vested interest of keeping Massachusetts hockey as strong as it possibly can be. So let's keep asking these questions and keep trying to figure out what Minnesota is doing right and what we're not doing as well as we used to do in order to, crank out more college hockey players, crank out more NHL draft picks, crank out more players that are high-end elite level than we're doing recently in the last few years. Evan, thank you very much for joining us. Evan Marinofsky from New England Hockey Journal. He's going to go do his photo shoot at St. Sebastian's. It should be fantastic for their cover story. Let's thank our sponsors, Factor Meals. Head to factormeals.com/Haggs50 and use code Haggs50 to get 50% off your first box. And FanDuel Sportsbook. The NFL season's in full swing right now, NHL season 2. You get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. You can bet on spreads, player props, over-unders, and so much more. Go to FanDuel.com/Boston and kick off the NFL season. Evan, thank you very much. We'll do this again and break down some Massachusetts hockey again sometime in the near future. Everybody else out there, thanks for listening to the Pucks with Haggs podcast. We'll see you at the rink.